and local letting process. So the tab that you just turned to in the back of the book, the very first thing is the guide. And if you read nothing else about the federal aid process, if you're not familiar with it very much, I would recommend that you read this. This is 21 pages long. Probably don't read it at bedtime, but read it. This will give you a couple of paragraphs on what you need to do, and then you can dive into the particular of that particular item in the IM. That also gives you more references. What we've done with these presentations that we're giving today is we kind of paralleled the guide. It steps you through. We're going to give you basically the same information that's in the guide and the references of where you go get further information. So the guide is very important. It will give you the basic understanding of what you need to do a federal aid project and keep all your federal funds. Then we have these things called instructional memorandums. The DOT has a couple of different kinds of instructional memorandums. We have materials IMs, and we have local systems IMs. And because we work in local systems, we call ours just the IMs. We call the materials IMs the materials IMs. So we're hopefully going to keep that distinction all day today. If we're talking just about IMs, we're probably talking about the local systems IMs. We have 70 instructional memorandums, IMs. This is where we go down into the weeds. This is where we take you step by step through the particular processes that you might be going through at that point in your project. There's 654 pages worth of information here, and Charlie Purcell, who came up with this initial concept, is an engineer, and I'm an engineer, and we like flowcharts, so there's lots of flowcharts in there too. Hopefully this will all help you step through the process. We do not have a regular schedule of when we update these. We update these as we need to. Last year we only sent out 2 revisions. This year we're probably going to send out 5 or 6. And we send those, we send a notification that we've made revisions to everybody on our mailing list. And since you folks are all here today, I'm assuming everybody in here got an email from Gail Nordholm about this. You're on our mailing list. So then you will also get the updates. If you want somebody else from your area, your office, to be on our mailing list, go to our webpage and there is a sign up. If you have problems with that, call Gail. She can step you through how to get signed up if you want somebody else to get signed up. Okay, so how does all this work together? This is the basic flow chart or graphic of how all this works. The federal aid guide, which is what I just talked about, that's the 21-page document, that's kind of the center. And it spokes off and references many things, including our instruction. See right here? Here's our materials IMs over here. We have other web pages and other online services. We're doing more and more of that. Utilities policy and for federal aid projects, that's a separate document. Our right-of-way manual for LPAs, our right-of-way folks are actually in the process of updating this, so there'll be a new version coming out. They're anticipating, I think, around the end of the year, but the guy that will be talking about that in his presentation, he'll give you more information on that. We also have a construction manual. This is from our Office of Construction and Materials. We reference that every so often. And then, of course, our standard specifications, details, drawings, everything that comes out of design and specifications. We also reference that throughout the guide in our instructional memorandums. Okay, so how do you start a project? Where do you start? What's the very first step? First thing you need to do is you need to get it planned and programmed. So you need to know where you're going to be doing your project and what kind of project it's going to be. This is where we recommend that you figure out your project limits, what's the maximum that you're going to do, you come up with a description, and you stay with that same description all the way through. It'll be easier for you folks, it'll be easier for us, and it'll be easier for the feds. When you folks go in and you change your descriptions during the project, it causes all kinds of problems for all kinds of people that you don't even know are working on your project for you. So if you can get that very first description to be exact, it would be wonderful. What we also recommend is that when you do your description, that you give it the information that you would be able to find it if you were a contractor to go to that location. So what I recommend is that you use your 911 street numbering system or naming system. So instead of, well, it's my father-in-law's farm's road over to Old Mill Road when actually it's 190th Street to 220th Street. Use the 190th to 220th Street. That's probably what they're going to be able to find the project by if they're going into Google or something like that. So that's what we recommend that you use. Something that everybody that's not familiar with your area can find it. Okay, so you need to get it into the documents that we can start doing the funding. So what you first need to do is you need to talk to your RPA, which is your regional planning affiliation, and your MPO, depending upon where you are. That's metropolitan. We have 9 of those in the state. They're the bigger metropolitan areas. And you need to get it into their TIP, which is the Transportation Improvement Program. So all TIP projects then go into our DOT statewide Transportation Improvement Program. That's what we give to the feds. That's how the feds know that you have a project that's going to be coming up and that you're going to be working on. Okay, you cannot receive authorization, which means money, from the feds unless you are in this TIP and then included in our STIP. And that's all electronic, so if you get it in the TIP, it will end up in our STIP. So if you want funding from the feds, you have to have it in there. The cost estimates also must be for the year of the expenditure. So do not do your cost estimate for a project that's 5 years out with today's dollars. Unless we have another big recession, which we did in 2008, 2009, kind of in 2010, where prices did go down on a lot of stuff. Now they're starting to stabilize and go back up a little bit. So make sure that you have enough money in there. It's kind of when you go and ask your parents when you were a kid that you needed some money to go do something, you always made sure you rounded up a little bit. I personally would do the same thing. Save you a lot of problems in the long run. Prices will go up. Estimates must be adjusted if moved from one fiscal year to another. So if you have something that you have out 2 years and you know you're not going to get it done, and you move it out to 4 or 5 year, make sure you also adjust that estimate. Take in some kind of a consideration for costs going up. Okay, so how do the county road departments get theirs into the TIP? Well, first of all, they have to have it in a 5-year program. You send those into Nicole. Then they will be put into the pool of the RPA and the MPO to put into their TIP, their Transportation Improvement Program. And then the counties promote it by submitting it into TPMS, which is the Transportation. Yes. Okay. I always want to put. Yeah, I want to put program in there. Okay. Thank you. So they put it into there, and then it gets put into it's included through TPMS into the DOT's STIP. So it's kind of an automated process. Just make sure it's in the TIP, and the rest should be taken care of. Okay, so how do cities do this? The city's information is also included in TPMS. They just don't put it in. It's actually put in by the MPO or the RPA. They get it in the TIP, into TPMS, and then it automatically goes into the DOT. We just saved them a little bit of typing. So the reference documents for this, there are STIP guidelines, and you can actually see the STIP itself if you want to check something out. There's the website for you. There's also a funding guide. If you're looking funding for a project that might be out of the ordinary, or you might have something that you want to do that you've never done before, you might want to skim through the funding guide. It's not a real long document. I think it's like 40 pages long, and each funding is on a separate page, and it tells you a basic information about what that funding can be used for, but more importantly, it tells you who to contact if you're interested in finding out if you can use any of that funding or if there's funding available. So that's another thing that you might want to bookmark as a website that could be useful. If you do have questions about it, Sean Majors in the Office of Program Management, he is the person behind that curtain that makes everything work for all of you folks and for the DOT. He's the person to contact. FHWA authorization. This is the most important step. If you want federal reimbursement, you need to make sure that you have it in the STIP and then you have federal authorization. Federal authorization, basically the feds sign off on your project that yes, they will pay their 80%, their 100%, their 50%, whatever the funding type is. You must have that federal authorization written notice from your administering office, the DOT, whomever you're working with at the DOT, whether that be a district or whether it be systems planning. You must have a written notice from them that they have gotten federal authorization before you start any work that you want reimbursed for. So don't start your project until you get that nice little letter. Yes?
As you're doing the programming, when you're planning the program, the year that you're going to put it in, the authorization date matters for which fiscal year it's in, correct?
Correct.
Not the letting date, not the work that.
Joe? Yeah, federal fiscal year. Here you go,
There
Joe.
is some confusion on that, between federal and state fiscal. We get that once in a while because we all operate on different fiscal years, and just make sure when you're doing the STIP is, and TPMS is by the federal fiscal year.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a big difference in September and October is the big one, because the federal fiscal year starts October 1st. So you need to know that you get it in the right fiscal year for that. Okay, how to obtain. First of all, the LPA requests federal authorization for specific activities for which they want reimbursed, their project that they want reimbursed for. Most things that we do are reimbursable. Most things that you folks will do are reimbursable. There are a few exceptions to that. There is more detail about that when you get into the IMs. Accurate project information from the LPA is critical. That's where we start getting into the description of the project and your estimates. Your estimates need to be within a reasonable ballpark. We know that the contractors will come in with a different amount and things do change a little bit, but you got to have something reasonable. Don't tell us that you're going to build a $150,000 bridge when you know it's going to be closer to $1 million. Don't do that. We want to get it reasonably close. The DOT then sends a request to FHWA, and we have an automated system for that. And then, if acceptable, the FHWA approves the request, and then the DOT administering office, whomever you're working with from the DOT, will give you a written notice. I'm thinking they're all going through email right now. We might get them into Doc Express eventually. The FHWA authorization has been approved. Then you can start work. Reimbursement requests. It has to be eligible, it has to be approved by the DOT, and it has to be authorized by FHWA. So you need to have those three things to get reimbursements. The process, the LPA pays your cost, you have to pay your costs up front. Then you request reimbursement from the DOT. The DOT reimburses the federal share, and then we get the money from the feds. So we're kind of your pass-through banker. Reimbursements should be requested at least every 6 months. That keeps you off the inactive obligations list. We in our office, okay, close your ears back there, you fed people. The whole back of the room is full of people from FHWA. We want you to put in a request every 6 months, because if you don't, you'll be put on the inactive list, and they are moving those goalposts further back and closer together and getting more strict. They want the money on the road. They want you to spend the money. That's what they're trying to get us to all do, which is what we should be doing. But they're getting more particular on what they let go to the next month or next quarter. So please put in a request every 6 months. I know a lot of locals used to pay for the entire project, especially if it was a smaller one, and then they would request it at the end of the project. Well, you asked for authorization a year and a half or 2 years ago, and now you're finally getting around to requesting reimbursement. None of us think you're working on it. They want the money on the road. So if you are working on it, request some reimbursement. In-kind contributions. This is pretty restricted. It's hard to document in-kind contributions. There is an IM on this. It's 7 pages long. If you want to have part of your local share, the part that the feds do not pay, if you want that to be something that is like right-of-way or some services, read that IM and talk to your administrating office. We've had to crack down on that a little bit. We still allow it on some of the projects, but there's some detailed information on that. You can also, they'll talk about it later today briefly on the project closeout for non-highway projects, but the IM will give you a lot of information on that, and that's IM 3.050. Most people don't use that anymore. We allow it on a few grant programs, about it. Okay, so the letting process. We're going to have an entire section on the letting process. We have somebody that's coming from our Office of Contracts who will talk about it, but I wanted to give you a basic overview. There's two ways you can let a project. You can let it through the DOT, or you can do it through your local process. Now, there's only a few federal aid grant programs that you let locally. You can let all local funded projects through the DOT. We'll do the work for you. It goes out to our same distribution list. It goes through our entire system. We make sure it's advertised. We cross all kinds of T's and dot all kinds of I's for you, and we do that. So if you want to use us for everything, that's fine. If you want to try to let a few federal aid projects on your own and all your other local let projects on your own, that's fine too. You can do either system. Some of the advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are if you have a local let, you can use SUDAS. For those of you that are familiar with statewide urban design and specifications books. It is subject to DOT review and approval if it's on a federal aid project and you are local letting it, and we do not allow you to use Division 1. Division 1 of SUDAS has not been approved by the feds. That's the contract part, and they have not reviewed it and approved it. I don't think they've even had an opportunity to review it. Another one of the advantages is you can let it on your own schedule. Our schedule is about 3 months before letting that you have to have it turned in, as most of you probably know by now. You can let it on your own schedule. If you want to let something in a couple, 3 weeks, you can do that. And you can establish your own contract periods. Disadvantages, you must complete a supplemental agreement. There's a separate agreement if you're going to let it locally and there's federal funds involved. So if you like signing your name, go for it. I must satisfy federal bid requirements. You're still going to have to do the advertising ahead of time. I think it's a 4-week advertising period, and there's some of that kind of stuff you're still going to have to do. You must have a bidding process, and you must follow the pre- and post-award checklists. For more information in this, 3.720 is the IM. It's the local letting process for federal aid, and the person who has the grant programs, a few grant programs that we do allow this on, is Deb Arp, or one of her people. You can check out the people on her on the list at the front of the book also that work for her. Okay, so with that, do we have any questions? Did I hear somebody? Somebody remotely have a question? Yeah. Yeah, we're not hearing you. Could you repeat it again? Oh, it sounds like somebody's asking a question about the DOT specs versus SUDAS specifications. If you're local letting a federal aid project, and there, like I said, there's only a couple small grant programs that we allow that on, you can use the SUDAS specifications. You just can't use Division 1 because that's still the contract part, and you have to use the DOT's contract information, the things that we make the requirements the contractor does. There are a couple sections, I think we have 4 or 5 now in the DOT spec book that are identical to SUDAS. We finally figured out that SUDAS knows what they're doing when it comes to urban information. For instance, they put in a heck of a lot more water main than we do at the DOT, so we partnered up with them, and our water main specification is identical to their water main specifications. They update theirs, we update ours. Same with their sanitary and storm sewer. We don't do a lot of that kind of work. We have the exact same information in our book now. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that we might have that are identical, and I can't think of them off the top of my head. But there's about 4 or 5 sections that are exactly the same. If it is the same, when you open up the DOT spec book, there's a paragraph at the very beginning underneath the header of that particular section that says something about this is identical to SUDAS, or there's something that indicates to you that this is a duplicate of SUDAS. So if you're using SUDAS for your water main and you're letting a project through the DOT with the DOT specification book, your water main is going to be exactly what you're used to using in SUDAS. So hopefully that answers that question. Another question?
Or a comment. When you are putting together your project descriptions, I just wanted to make most of the attendees aware that there's a blue sign at each railroad intersection with a 6-digit or 7-digit number, four numbers and 1 alpha character. That gives the railroads and probably the feds an exact location of where that railroad track is. They're all at-grade crossings, not just separations, but all of your at-grade crossings should have that number posted on it now.
Everybody hear that? Okay, any other questions on how to start the process? Okay, one of the other things that we need to talk about before we really start diving into the actual process is civil rights. Everybody has the right to have their rights addressed. So we have Karen Keenis from our civil rights section that will be presenting on this today. So with that, Karen. So they can all see that.
Okay, good morning. Thanks for being here. I just want to let you know something in advance. I'm probably going to depart a little bit from some of the slides. I want to apologize. That bothers some people and it doesn't bother other people. The reason for it is that these were updated about 2 weeks ago. And Donna updated the things, especially dealing with ADA, which I really appreciate because that's not an area that, some of the technical stuff that I'm not very familiar with. I just got back late last night from the AASHTO Civil Rights Symposium in Virginia. And what I want to do is share with you some of the things that I found out while I was in Virginia, some of the things that are hot topics, especially for federal highway. There were also representatives from federal transit and some from federal aviation as well. My focus primarily was on federal highway. Am I getting feedback? Okay. My emphasis in terms of the sessions that I attended were federal highway or federal transit primarily. But these things are going to have an impact, I think, a broader impact over time. I think everybody is familiar with the fact that there's been some talk at the big DOT that they were going to try to integrate some of the requirements that were different for transit, aviation, and highway. And I can tell you just over almost 3 years that I've been here, they've been going further apart than they have been coming together. We've been hearing, yeah, we're going to work on it, we're going to work on it, and yet what we're seeing is they're diverging even more so. To some extent, I understand that. To others, it's kind of frustrating for those of us who are trying to figure out how do we satisfy, 1 or 2, or even worse if you're working with 3 or 4 of the different operating agencies. I don't know. We'll find a way. We're working to try and find a way. So what I want to do is get started with talking about, we'll talk about Title VI, talk about ADA and DBE. To some extent, I'm going to deviate a little bit, like I said, from the slides and from some of the content in it, because I want to give you some of the more updated information that came out of Alexandria. But I also want to make sure that we get back and stay on time. You've got a long day ahead of you, and it's a lot harder when you're off the schedule. So I will finish on time. First off, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, one of the things that we hear a lot about is Title VI, Title VI, Title VI. The fact of the matter is that what we refer to as Title VI is no longer what was purely Title VI when the law was first established back in 1964. What we're looking at now is what I refer to as Title VI and its progeny. By progeny, what I mean is those additional criteria or protected classes that have come about as a result of statutes after 1964 or as a result of lawsuits and the resolution of some of those lawsuits in the interim. So one of the things that makes a difference is when you take a look at what Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 covers, It prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, gender, age, or disability. And frankly, there's an issue right now about whether or not Title VI does cover sex. It's one of the things that's coming out of some of the bathroom cases, especially out of North Carolina and also out of Texas. Some of those lawsuits and what those states are saying right now is that gender, which is different than sex, gender is not a protected class under Title VI. And so it's going to be interesting what happens out of those cases in the not too distant future. It's probably a losing argument, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. So basically what you're looking at is those are the original protected classes that came out of Title VI. But what we're looking at right now are the fact that some of the other protected classes have been adopted, like I said, either through progeny, and that would be subsequent cases or subsequent statutes. One of the things that's different right now is when you're looking at a Title VI plan or you're looking at a Title VI program or when you're looking at Title VI assurances, is that there are differences between federal highway, federal transit, federal aviation, and now Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. FMCSA is now requiring a Title VI plan. In the past, we only had one Title VI plan, and that was for federal highway. Everybody else was on board with it. Well, federal transit, no, we need something a little bit different. We need to have a couple of other different things. But you can take the plan that you've already got, and you can make a couple of modifications. We're going to be fine. It's going to be all cool. It really doesn't work that way. So what we wound up doing is we wound up breaking it off, and we had two different Title VI plans. And if you take a look on the Civil Rights Team's webpage, you're going to see that there are three of them. So we couldn't quite make those differences work, and it seemed to be easier. We'll have two separate plans. They're about 96% the same. They're about 5%, 6%, 4%. Really makes a difference. Long-time federal aviation, they wanted something a little bit different. Yeah, you can use your federal highway plan, just make a couple of changes in it, and it'll work. Nah, we're going to do a third one. And we did for the differences. We took a look at FMCSA. FMCSA wants something a little bit different. Really, for the most part, those differences are things that the Civil Rights Team needs to be very aware of. The differences out in the field are not a whole lot. It's extremely important to be very aware of Title VI and to be very cognizant of how Title VI impacts everything it is that you're doing. What we're looking at is we're looking at trying to create some sort of training that encapsulates what the differences are and taking a look at rolling it into one package. You don't need to remember, you shouldn't have to remember what are the differences. If you work specifically with one of those other programs, yes, you do. But the vast majority of people, their work does not cross all those programs. So how does Title VI impact you? And we're working on training that's going to make that very clear, very specific. One of the things that's very different, though, that resulted in us doing different program plans is that LEP, or limited English proficiency, is now one of the characteristics that is protected under Title VI's progeny. Another thing that's not protected, and that's very important to FMCSA, is income status, low income status in particular. What they want is they want assurances that we are considering the impact that our work has or may have on people in low income communities. That's also an issue too when you look at transportation. Transportation wants a consideration of whether or not route changes, schedule changes, or fare increases have a disproportionate impact on people in low income communities. Hard to see how a fare increase isn't going to have a disproportionate impact on somebody in a low income community, because any fare increase, even a modest increase, is going to have a disproportionate impact on people who have a very low or very limited income. So we need to take those things into consideration. And again, I'm using this as an example because some people that are listening in, this is going to be really important to your analyses and what it is that you're doing. You're already considering this. So other people, it's not something that you're going to be coming into contact with on an ongoing basis. But it's something to be aware of, because it's those types of things. How does this impact people? Who are the people that may be impacted by it? Who may be touched by this? Who may be touched positively or negatively? That's one of the things I want us to take a look at now too. How would this have a positive impact on a different community? If it makes a community more, a somewhat isolated community, much more integrated or have an easier access to cultural areas or to entertainment venues or to jobs especially. If it's something that's in consideration and it will have a positive impact, you can take a look at balancing the positive impact and the negative impact to take a look at whether or not overall this is going to be beneficial for different groups. And again, making sure that it doesn't disproportionately impact one or another of the groups. So, and if you have questions about this, feel free to give myself a call or anyone on the civil rights team. Some of you are probably more familiar with Title VI and what we're doing with Title VI when it comes to the compliance reviews. Just a good checklist for compliance actions, what everybody is expected to have. And again, because there are changes and because there are different requirements that are expected of different operating administrations, be sure to let us know. Steve Kerber and Nikki Rainey are our two Title VI compliance officers. They are out on a regular basis. We do a random now. It's a weighted random, and weighted to me tosses the concept of random out, but it's a weighted random selection of different communities that are going to be, I don't want to say subject to, that they will be reviewed for Title VI compliance. And this is one of the things that I'd like to ask people who are participating today. If you are aware of any questions or concerns or resistance that some of the communities you may be encountering or maybe dealing with on a regular basis, if you have any concerns about their commitment to Title VI or their ability to grasp what it is that they're required to do under Title VI, please let us know. One of the things that's really important to the team is working in partnership with the organizations, the agencies, the sub-agencies that need to be reviewed for Title VI compliance. Everybody's going to have to be at one point. I mean, let's face it, with the number of small communities we have, it would take years and years. We only have 2 people that are doing these reviews. But what we want to do is we want to offer education and support to those communities. We are finding that there's some very, not surprisingly, very significant differences between the communities in terms of what their preparedness is for dealing with Title VI issues, and also what their ability to understand, because this is not something that they've encountered before. This is not something that's been a big push from the feds until more recently. So those communities that have not been reviewed before are kind of, they're feeling a little bit lost. What is it we're supposed to do? What's an ADA, what's an ADA coordinator supposed to do? What are you expecting us to do? Why should we have to do this? We haven't gotten any federal funds. Oh yeah, they probably have. They just aren't really aware of it. The likelihood that any community has not received any federal funds in the last 10 years is pretty remote. But my point is that please let us know. And if Steve or Nikki is having any problems with some of the communities, we'll let you know and ask for any assistance. Who's the go-to person? It's not the same person in every one of the communities. And Steve being based in Ottumwa and Nikki being based in Waterloo, yeah, they've gotten to know some of the go-to people in some of the communities, but it's not possible for them to know all of them. So if you do get an inquiry like that, please understand that's the reason for it. Being out of compliance with Title VI is not something that we want any of these communities to have a problem with. It can wind up with some really significant problems for them. We want to avoid that. So the educational component and the partnership component is really huge in the team's philosophy. And we want to do that internally and externally both. And that's, you can see that's pretty daunting for only a small group of people to do. We may need your help from time to time, and we'll definitely appreciate it. Just some information about access to additional details. Do you have any questions about Title VI? Nope. Okay. That's just it in a nutshell. Like Donna said earlier, 10,000 foot view. ADA, okay. Moving on. This is one where I'm going to depart from quite a bit from the slides. I already did from the other 2, so fair warning. Like I said, Donna did update these, so the technical information is accurate. What I want to talk about right now is actually referred to towards the end of the slide presentation. It's accessible, alternation, resurfacing, technical feasibility, documenting exceptions. Transition plan is what I want to talk about, what I want to spend the time on. The transition plan is something that was not a hot topic for years, with Federal Highway especially. FTA, transit, also requires a transition plan. Transition plans have become an extremely hot topic in the last few months. And part of the reason is, I mean, it's probably no secret, there was an internal review. There was a risk assessment with Federal Highway, and they were found, not being as much on top of things as they should have been. And by saying that, I do not mean the Iowa Division Office. They've been wonderful partners. But at a national level. Their ability to pull together, to be coherent, and to get the states to work together to address consistent problems across the country were not that good. And so they were given a number of recommendations, things that they needed to do and things that they needed to shore up on. And things roll downhill. And so what we're looking at right now is a big push to address our ADA transition plan. I'm not even remotely suggesting we didn't already have one. I'm not even remotely suggesting that we weren't ahead of the curve in terms of the content of our ADA transition plan. But what I am here to tell you is that what Federal Highway is looking at is having the states be a lot more consistent in what their ADA transition plans contain and much more technical about the detail and the level of detail that must be in those ADA transition plans. And it came as a bit of a surprise. It's not something that's going to be impossible to do, but of course it comes as a surprise. You've gone along doing what it is that you're doing for a number of years, everything's been fine, and all of a sudden you find out, whoa, we need to do things significantly different. And that has been a bit of a surprise. So one of the things that they're looking at, and I sat through several sessions in the last couple of days about ADA transition plans. What's the minimum that needs to be in the plan? How do you implement it? What's going to be expected in the coming years? And one of the things that's been focused on primarily has been sidewalks, intersections, curb ramps, and that's a good thing. And that's been fairly consistent across the country that most communities, most states have been looking at, especially those particular issues. When you take a look inside buildings, yeah, the reason why we had the lever handles, larger restroom stalls for easier access, a lot of changes that have been made, omitting steps or using ramps so that people who are mobility impaired have an easier access into a building or within the inside of a building. Those are all consistent with ADA. And so people have been working, we've been working with ADA compliance for years and years and years. And if you can remember, back prior to 1990, things were a whole lot different. Access was a lot different. Doorknobs were a lot different. And there's been a significant change. But what they're moving toward is looking at not just those types of physical changes or modifications that need to be made for people with physical impairments, but they're looking at making changes. What they want our transition plan ultimately to include is a consideration of everything that could touch on any disabled person. And that includes visual impairments or auditory impairments as well. So eventually our transition plan is going to need to include consideration of our communication plans, how we communicate with people. They also want us to consider how do we communicate with people, not just with low vision, but people with lower reading skills. Are we able to communicate our message in such a way that people who are either not English proficient, and this is one of the things they're expanding, limited English proficiency. We generally think of limited English proficiency as being people who are not native English speakers, who are still on learning curve, are not quite fluent in English yet. But that also includes people who have got visual impairments. Can we provide a document in Braille? Yeah, we can. We do have the ability to produce documents in Braille, but one of the considerations we need to have is we can't do it immediately. We need to have advanced time in order to have that document produced in Braille. The other thing we need to do is take a look at what's the length of the document. Iowa Department of Blind is graciously willing to produce documents in Braille, but if we give them a 130-page report and say, can you put this in Braille for us? Oh, by the way, we need it day after tomorrow. It's not going to happen. But we're not required to provide the entire 130-page document in Braille. We need to take a look at what alternatives are. The other thing is what's the need? Is there a need for an entire 130-page document? We can synopsize it. We can take the essential information that's out of the document, put it into a synopsis, provide it to somebody, whether in Braille, whether in an auditory, an audio file, various other ways of taking a look at how we can meet their needs. And if they want additional information, we can provide it to them. We don't have to provide the entire 130-page document from the outside. So this is a place where limited English proficiency and ADA are going to intersect in the not too distant future. What we considered to be an LEP issue is now going to be an ADA issue as well. So there's going to be a lot more melding of those two. So that's one of the things that's going to be coming down the pike. We're going to need to take a look at that, how it is that we're going to address that, how do we assess how well we're meeting the needs of people with different abilities. And one of the points that was made repeatedly during the trainings that I was at on ADA transition plans over the last couple of days was, with the changes in the definitions of what meets a disability under ADA, probably everyone in this room, if you are not right now, you have been in a situation in which you would be considered to have a disability that impacts one or more essential life activities. And if you think about it, you may not be aware of it off the top of your head, but you probably have been. I broke my arm about 20 years ago while I was on vacation. I was on cast for 5 weeks. I had plates and screws in there. I right hand dominant. It was my right arm that was broken. So was it difficult? I didn't consider myself disabled during that time period, but there were a lot of things that I couldn't do. My then boyfriend graciously put toothpaste on my toothbrush. He tied my shoes. I couldn't do those things at first. After a couple of weeks, yeah, I could, but with both bones broken, I wasn't squeezing that toothpaste tube. It didn't work. I did learn how to take my contact lenses in and out with my left hand. There are some things that are really important. You're going to learn how to do that really quickly. But, you know, it depends on that. That would constitute a temporary disability. So anyone who's had an injury like that, if you had a broken leg, if you've had a dislocated shoulder, those types of things, you know how it makes a change and how you're able to do things on a day-to-day basis. And those are temporary. So we're also looking at what do we need to do? How do we need to help those people and accommodate those people for whom it's temporary also, but permanent. So anyway, that may be more than you wanted to know about it, but it's coming down the pike. So moving on to Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, DBE. One of the things I want to mention, again, departing a little bit from the slides, the information that's in the slides is valuable information. I'm not discounting it any, but you can read it. And that's kind of one of my pet peeves. Somebody who stands up there and reads the slides like, I can read. But one of the things we want people to know about with DBEs is that the DBE program serves a valuable purpose. But there have also been a number of concerns. There have also been a number of things that happened with the DBE program recently that probably you may or may not be aware of, but I want to let you know about it. One of the things that happened, I think in 2012, it was before I was here, there was a spec change. In the past, a prime contractor was required to meet a DBE goal or commit to an amount, contract dollar amount that was equivalent to the DBE goal. If there was 4% goal on the contract as a whole, then the commitment to the DBE needed to be equivalent to 4% of the total contract value. In practice, that became very difficult to calculate at the very end to ensure that that commitment had been met. So as a result, the spec was changed, and there's a specific dollar amount that is committed by the prime to the DBE subcontractor. And it's much easier to determine there's X number of dollars. If the contract was $133,000, it's a whole lot easier to figure out at the end, was the DBE paid $133,000 or were they not? If they were not, and there was no change that was made contemporaneously, and that could be, it could be a change order. It could be, in some instances, if the DBE was unable to show up on the job site and finish the work that was committed to them. If they had been properly removed, or if there had been a proper contemporaneous reduction in the commitment to the DBE, then it's going to be all right. If there was not, and contemporaneous really is crucial, if there was not a contemporaneous alteration that was made, then there was going to be a price adjustment dollar for dollar in the amount that was going to be paid to the prime contractor. What we found, starting probably in the latter part of the fall, was probably 8 or 9 contracts in which the commitment had not been met. The dollar for dollar commitment had not been met for a variety of reasons. And what we also found is that in some instances, some of these could easily have been corrected had there been contact made on the job site and also with the civil rights team very promptly at the time. We had one instance, I'll use one for example. I'm not, if anybody knows exactly who this is, I'm not picking on the prime contractor by any means. It's just probably the easiest example. We had a situation where there was a $900 shortfall in the amount that the prime paid to the DBE. What had happened is that on the very last day, the prime was looking at going into liquidated damages, going into is it called liquidated damages? Okay, because I revert back sometimes to the wrong terminology. But the prime was looking at damages that were being assessed for each day that they went over, and this was the last day. The DBE contractor was not able to make it to the site. They were a little bit overextended. They were not able to make it to the job site that very last day. And so the prime and the DBE contractors had an informal agreement. Go ahead, just get the work done. It's not that big a deal. So what happened is the prime then paid the DBE the entire amount, including, for the work for that very last day. The DBE caught it and said, no, 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 no. We didn't show up on the job site that day, so we're not entitled to this last $900, and sent them back a check for $900. So when the project's being closed out, we find that there was $900 under what the DBE should have been paid, and the prime is going to be assessed. There's going to be a price adjustment for this because the commitment wasn't made. Now, the prime contractor, needless to say, was pretty hot under the collar. That, hey, they couldn't show up that last day. I did pay them that $900, and they gave it back to me because they weren't able to show up on the job that day. So what gives? Why am I being assessed this $900? They're like, this is one of the situations where they did the right thing, but they didn't do all the right things. And the right thing that they did is, number one, DBE was being really honest. Hey, I wasn't there. I'm not entitled to this $900. The prime talked to the DBE, and they came up with a formal agreement. Those are the right things to do, but it's not all the right things. And the other thing that they should have done is 5-minute phone call would have done it. 5-minute phone call would have done it. They could have talked to the RCE, told them what the problem was, why they needed to make this change at the very last minute. Our civil rights team, we could have said, that's fine. We will note it contemporaneously. It's okay. The adjustment is fine. 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops would have done it. So when I was talking to the prime, I said, what were we supposed to do? You were going to require us to go and find another DBE for this one day of work. I'm like, well, no. What we do is we take a look at what your circumstances are on the ground at that point in time. If you had explained to us this was the last day, DBE was not able to show up on the site, would we have called the DBE and said, is this the case? And verified with them? Yeah, we would have. So one more phone call, we would have verified it. Everything is fine. We would have documented it contemporaneously, and everybody could have moved on, and there would not have been that price adjustment. So I let the prime vent for a while. I understood why it was that he felt the need to vent. And once he was done venting, he could listen to what it was that I had to say. And it said, pick up the phone, call us, talk to us for a couple of minutes, talk to the RCE. This is something that can be fixed. At the end, he said, wow, I guess I need to go back and read this back, don't I? And I appreciated the way that ended. And I can, with 99% certainty, feel that this contractor is not going to have the same problem again. So because we had a number of situations like this that occurred last fall, we had a number of situations like this that occurred last fall, what we decided to do is be proactive. You'll probably see this in a few weeks, is we had magnets that were made. Jackie Miskimmons on the civil rights team was talking to one of the primes, and they had an opportunity to talk for a while. And the idea came about, if there was a reminder, something that we could do to let them know, hey, call us. There are numerous situations, numerous circumstances under which we can be of help. So that's where the idea of this magnet came about. So the magnets are going to be available. You can have magnets if you want to, distribute them, use them, hang them up in your office, whatever you want. And it has the civil rights team's phone number and email address on it so that we can address some of those issues. So I didn't want to short circuit anything on the DBE program because that's important too. But I also think that some of this proactive stuff, how do we prevent situations in which there's a price adjustment? I think that's equally important. That's not in the slides, so that's why I decided to talk about it. Does anybody have any questions about any of those things, or it needn't be what I talked about or what's on the handout material that's relevant to those three topics? Oh. Okay, y'all are ready for your break then. Thanks very much. Have a great day.